How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us. And that's what the I Am Real World's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins. Brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Well, welcome everyone to Chasing Giants with Don Higgins, episode 26, brought to you by buyafarm.com. I'm Terry Peer. We got Don Higgins on the line tonight.
How's it going, Terry?
Great. It's July 26th. We're getting into that anxious moment right before deer season here. Everybody putting their final plots in. Well, I guess spring plots are already in, and people are getting ready to put their fall plots in here in the next month. So what have you been up to?
Oh, checking trail cameras, mowing around the farm, just odds and ends, getting ready for it to really cut loose. Going to start the seminar tour this week, leaving in the morning for Ohio and then headed to Michigan for a couple.
Yeah, your seminar.
And then the following.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The following week I'll be in Kansas, so kind of anxious to get them over with too, because once the seminar season's over with, then I can focus 100% on deer.
Yeah, your seminar season's a little later this year because of everything being shut down with COVID. But, you know, the other thing that we don't really talk about a lot, you know, as we're talking about prepping for deer season, is the amount of work we try to crunch into this time of the year just so we don't have all of those just normal chores around the farms during deer season to not only open up time but not be on the property, you know, closer to hunting season. And we try to cram in a lot of both honeydews and projects around the house and different things this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. My list is not so long because of the COVID last spring. You know, it cut short my consulting season. So I got a lot of things done in the spring that I would typically do later in the year. And then I got rid of my beef cows, and so I didn't cut hay all summer. Didn't have to worry about that project this year. So that freed up a little time. So now I'm sitting in pretty good shape.
Yep. So what's the outside of the seminars coming up? You got 2 weeks, I think, Ohio, Michigan, and then out to Kansas. Did you say you're going to have one in Iowa also? Or just Kansas?
Just Kansas. I had
two
one in
Kansas,
Iowa.
Though.
Right, two the same day.
Gotcha.
Two different seminars. One is for a bunch of new real-world dealers, and then the other one is open to the public. So do two in a day there. I did one in Iowa earlier in the month, so
that's right.
That's probably what you was thinking about.
Yeah. So what's the outside of checking trail cameras and glassing the fields, what's your buck forecast predictions for this time of year and what you think is going to happen this year? You got any insight on that?
Well, I do, but I'm not quite ready to share it because it's a little bit early. I've got some cameras that haven't even been checked at all yet. And I'd like to wait until about mid-August.
Okay.
But, you know, I've on my the blog on my website the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, I've given a buck forecast, just kind of a general prediction for that season. And they've been pretty darn spot on. A lot of people have agreed with them. I get a lot of emails and social media messages telling me that I was spot on. I don't know. This year is a strange year. I won't go into it too much, but, you know, the weather back in April, we thought, I wrote a blog post that things were setting up beautiful for antler growth. It looked like we was having an early spring. We had about a week of tremendous weather there in early April. A lot of crops got put in the ground, and then all of a sudden it went back to winter almost. It got wet and cold, and everything got put on hold. No crops were planted for about a month. The crops that were planted during that week of good weather, a lot of that seed just sit in the ground. It seemed like forever. I don't think I've ever seen soybean seed sit in the ground as long as some of that did in the local fields, around my neighborhood. And in fact, the farmer that farms my ground planted it during that April period. And I thought it never was going to come up. And I thought, shoot, them soybeans are going to rot. But, those soybeans were treated just like the real world soybeans are treated with fungicide. And, as soon as that weather warmed up, and about a month later, boom, here comes the beans. And I think every one of them grew.
Now, your food plot beans are looking really good, right?
I've got the best soybean plots I've maybe ever had. One thing that helped was the ag fields around me were in soybeans. And like I said, the field on my property actually got planted in soybeans early. So, that took some browse pressure off. But and then I put more acres into soybeans than I've ever put in the past, too. So that helped with the browse pressure.
Yeah, you took some what you were used to mowing for hay and put them in soybeans, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm looking real good. If I can get some good fall plots in, I will probably have my best food plots ever.
Well, that's going to make it a whole lot more fun, especially in late season on your farm, because that's where it's at. They got both of the cover and the food, and they'll come from a long ways away to get that. So,
right. So things are looking good on that end for sure.
Good. We got I know that a little bit later on today that we're going to be talking about I guess we can go ahead and call it a more of a controversial subject in the deer industry. And I think you're going to touch on a couple of topics, but when we teased this episode last week, so we were going to be talking about culling bucks, it got a lot of responses with a lot of questions that came in over the last 10 days, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a topic that I think a lot of people have an opinion about. I think culling bucks, a lot of times hunters just use that as an excuse to shoot something. They say they took the buck out of the herd so he didn't breed and pass on bad genes or something like that. But
yeah,
I've kind of got a unique angle as far as managing my farm, and it's really paid off.
Well, we're going to get to it in a minute. The reason I brought it up now is you and I were talking just before the episode, or before I mentioned, before I hit record on the panel tonight, that last week's episode was our largest download in the first week cycle that we've ever had. So I don't know if it was a combination of a lot more people were listening to it or hitting a sensitive subject that people want to learn more about, or it's controversial, but we want to appreciate all the support on everybody giving us. One of the things that you wanted to do with this podcast that I'll be honest, I wasn't real sure how successful it would be, was you wanted to take questions from our listeners, directly about their properties or their hunting style or techniques. And I think that's one of the things that set our podcast apart from so many other things. I think we get a ton of great feedback about that. So if you don't know, you can submit questions at chasinggiants.com, which actually leads you to higginsoutdoors.com, but you can just type in chasinggiants.com and it'll have a little form there. If you fill out all of the information on that form and then submit a question, and we use it on the air, Don will actually send you a free Chasing Giants t-shirt. So we've been passing out a lot of t-shirts.
Yeah, it must have been a good idea because we've got more questions than we can possibly answer. And I know another podcast is copied and is now doing the same thing.
Yep.
At least one other podcast. So,
yep.
You know what they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery or
something like that.
So, yeah. So it must have been a good idea or nobody would have copied it. So.
Yep. So appreciate that support. Make sure that as you're downloading this or looking at it on all the various platforms, you give us a ranking and a review. that helps other people find it. So we got a really good property on biofarm.com's segment here a little bit later, but do you have anything else that we want to talk about here before we kind of move on the podcast?
Well, you might give people an update on your surgery. I think you've had surgery since the last podcast, and now you're in rehab, and I've had a lot of comments about it. Just the fact that you're sharing it, and that shows we're hunting the real world, and we've got obstacles just like everybody else to deal with. So
Okay.
you might give folks an update on your surgery.
All right. Well, I am just a little over a week out. I had surgery a week ago Friday, so I'm about, what would that make it, 9 days post-surgery. The overall experience of the surgery was really weird with the COVID protocols. Never really seen anything like it, but the surgery was successful. I actually received a donor ligament, which is handled the exact same way as a organ donor, which I hadn't really thought about it a lot, to be honest with you. But the first couple days after surgery, you're still kind of groggy, and I think I slept most all day Saturday and most of Sunday. Monday when I got up, I started, kind of going through my paperwork, and there was just a lot of information that I left the surgical center with about the knee, and it was really put the whole experience into another perspective, because there was a pamphlet there about the donor, and people who donate their organs or tissue or whatever as they pass. There's actually this database that there's this code that I can go online and actually write a thank you letter to the family of the donor. Now, there's never any contact that I can have with them, but it's quite humbling when you put in perspective. You start self-pity and oh crap, I got all this rehab I got to go through to try to get back for deer season, or my summer shot. But what they put inside my right knee to fix it was the result of someone else's tragic loss. And it's just really hit heavy since then. It's like it puts stuff in perspective really, really quick when you start thinking about that, part of your healing is someone else's loss. And, that whole side of the experience I was not expecting. But just very grateful. So I haven't written the letter yet. I've thought about it. I didn't want to do it while I was on pain meds, obviously, because I wanted it to be coherent and very respectful and show how much appreciation I had for it. But I'll probably be writing that this week. It's outside of the rehab. What everybody hears about it, it's as excruciating as what everybody hears about it. So I had therapy again Friday. I have it tomorrow, and then Wednesday I have to do multiple rounds of exercises each day, even though I don't go to therapy, and have to track it on an app on my phone. And then the PT person assigned to me is leaving comments. I have to judge how much pain I see at different exercises. So he's in there always monitoring that when I'm doing the exercises at home. But I'm telling you, it's rough. But when you start thinking about how somebody else, lost a family member, you deal with it. And progress is good. Range of motion is good. They're letting me put just a little bit of weight as I walk with my crutches to help me balance myself. But I'm pushing myself as hard right now with pain management, because I don't want to be on medication, and pushing the speed of therapy as fast as I can, because my goal is still to cut the average rehab time to be able to walk by 2 weeks. So if they did a timeline for me being able to walk, it would be mid-September. And I've said from the very beginning I want to walk opening day of Kentucky archery season. So I'm trying to shave 2 weeks off of it. And my doctor and my physical therapist thinks I'm absolutely crazy, but I guess that is what I am.
Well, you got to have goals.
Yeah. So
just like we have hunting goals.
I told you, I think when you checked on me, the day of surgery or whatever, I think I told you I had over 100 kind of private messages on Instagram and Facebook from people I've never met in person that just listened to the show. And I mean, we have a lot of followers both through Real World and through Chasing Giants, and there's a lot of downloads, but for that many people who don't even know me to reach out and just offer a bit of encouragement or their prayers, very humbling, very appreciated. It means a lot. So, going to be trying to do that quite a bit more when I see people going through that, because I know how much it meant to me when I was getting it from people. Like I said, I have no idea who some of these people are. So.
Well, that's awesome.
Yep.
I know our listeners or our listening audience is growing. I can tell it by the number of questions we get and the number of just messages. People not even submitting a question, but just telling us to keep up the good work. They glad they found the podcast and this and that. So
it's the hunting community is kind of gone through cycles, and we get these little pockets where it's. You almost get these little family things and, groups of people that kind of back each other up. And it's really cool to see, people in the hunting community, being there for each other and supporting it. And I really did appreciate it. It was usually I get those kind of private messages of people who want to be my friend when I talk about how many turkeys I have walking around my farm. Because if you want friends, you either buy a trailer or you have hunting property. You always have friends. But no, in all seriousness, a lot of people reached out. It was very cool. It was very humbling that people took time to do that. So
that's awesome.
We'll keep pushing at it, and I'm still shooting for that first weekend of September where I can walk back the ridge and get in a blind. If I have a blind that I can walk in and don't have to climb a ladder to get up in it. So if I can do that by the first weekend of September, I'll be doing good. My 14-year-old son has been just an absolute huge help around the house. I was telling Don before we got on here, he and my 19-year-old daughter hooked up the 16-foot trailer onto the back of my truck for me yesterday and loaded up the side-by-side, and we hauled it over to the farm, and they drove me around and filled my feeders and pulled the cards out of the trail cameras, and so I had over 20,000 pictures to look at here the last couple of days. But they've been a huge help, and so I'm hoping. I don't know what my hunting season's going to work out, but if I can get him a good buck, that's going to be the biggest goal of my hunting season, is me get back to where I can take him and get him a big buck. That would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, if I know you, I bet you make your goal.
Well, we're going to do everything we can to try. So.
Yep.
All right. So we ready to move on to the buyfarm.com segment?
Yep.
All right.
We got a good one this week.
All right.
Buyafarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
All right, this week's featured property is another online auction. It's 120 acres in Saline County, Illinois. The bidding doesn't start until August 13th, and it's only open for a week until August 20th. It closes at 8 p.m. on the 20th, but it's a very unique property, is why I picked it for this podcast. It's almost all tillable. The 120 acres, there's like 111 of that is tillable. There's 2 ponds, but what I like about it is that it's got so many options. You could sign it up for a CRP program, and basically it's a blank canvas waiting for you to just paint a masterpiece as far as wildlife habitat goes. You could diversify that tillable acres into, warm season grasses like switchgrass. You can strategically place your food plots. You could plant some of it into other CRP programs like the pollinator program or a tree planting program. If you look at the the listing on the Buy a Farm website, you can see that the farm has a little bit of roll to it, not much, but just a little. There's a couple of grass ditches that cut through some of these ag fields, and you could leave part of that tillable and farm it, or you can leave it all tillable and farm it if that's your thing. But it's just a property that you could really make into something special. And if you look on the aerials that are on the website, you'll see there's plenty of cover in that area, so there ought to be a lot of deer there anyway. You can bring them to your property and set it up in such a way that make it very huntable. This farm is actually located on the Harco Blacktop near Harco, Illinois. Taxes are less than $200 a year, so yeah, really cheap taxes. But sign it up for the CRP program and turn it into a honey hole, and just lots of options there. If you're interested in this one, make sure to call Don Bailey, the listing agent. Don's phone number is 618-919-1031. And if you'd like to see it, to view the property, I'm sure Don would be glad to meet you there and give you a tour. But the bidding opens August 13th, so do your homework before then and get ready to bid.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever heard taxes on anything being that cheap. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's basically, it's less than $2 an acre.
Huh.
120 acres. The taxes are $199.02.
Wow. So, again, online auction in Saline County, Illinois. Go to buyafarm.com's website and learn more about this property. Could be an absolute steal if you're looking for the right piece of property. So, and you won't find cheaper taxes. So,
that's for sure.
We'll move on. I've intentionally, people will notice that we kind of blew through that first segment before the buyafarm.com section, because I know that this is going to take us a little while. Even though we have 3 questions here, probably the amount of discussion we're going to have on these 3 questions are going to take a little bit more time. So let's go ahead and move into our submitted questions for the week, because I want to do this topic and these 3 questions that you received. I want to give them a very clear explanation, because, like I said, your theory on this is quite a bit different than what anybody else will hear.
Yeah, we mentioned last week, Terry, that we get a lot of questions on culling bucks. So I went through all the submitted questions, and I picked out one on culling bucks that I think, kind of sets the stage for us to get into that. So this first question comes from Amos Hirschberger. And Amos is one of my clients from Ohio. If you happen to know Amos, ask him what we did to his farm. The guy.
Don't be in a hurry if you ask him that.
Yeah, he sent me a message last summer, and him and his sons went to the farm to in the evening time, about this time of the year. They was doing some work there, but evening time they slipped into an alfalfa field that we'd laid out for him. And when they got to this alfalfa field, Amos said there was over 40 antlered bucks there. 40 antlered bucks in one field at one time on his property. And that was the first summer, right after I'd been there to lay out a plan for him. And then last spring, he was going to come to my whitetail master course here on my farm. He was so impressed with what happened on his, he wanted to come here and see if he could pick up some more. But so that course got canceled. So that kind of explains the beginning here of what Amos wrote. Because he was going to be at that course, and we was going to record a Chasing Giants podcast, and he was going to ask about culling bucks on that podcast.
Right.
But he didn't get the chance. So Amos says, here's one of the questions that I wanted to ask in the Chasing Giants podcast at the Whitetail Master Course. What are your thoughts on culling bucks? My personal opinion is if the buck doesn't show potential as a 2 to 3 year old, I would cull it and make room for some that show greater potential. as a yearling, they could be from a young doe, but once they get 2 to 3 years old, they should have caught up. On our farm, we have yearlings and 2-year-olds that are mainframe 10-pointers with stickers and split tines. However, we also have 2 to 3-year-olds that are 6-pointers. Almost all exceptional large bucks people are hunting, they start following as 2 and 3-year-olds. The question is, what are your thoughts on culling bucks? So, that's pretty straightforward. If you listen to the so-called experts, they're going to tell you that you cannot change the genetics of a wild herd by culling. And I absolutely agree with that. The way deer disperse across the landscape and such, there's just no way that you can have an impact on the genetics of a wild herd, and start growing bigger bucks that way. However, as a land manager, I think I've come up with a unique approach, and there's probably other people doing it. I don't know. I've never heard of anyone else doing it this way, but it's worked very well. And as proof of that, something really interesting that I want to share about my own property. When I started with this property, 25 years or more ago, typically on an average year, there would be the biggest buck on the property would be about 150 inches. And each year the biggest buck would be right there around that 150 inch mark. And then about every 3 years or so, there would be one that was a little bit bigger, usually around the 170 inch mark. So, I would have a 150 inch buck here to hunt 2 or 3 years, and then I'd have a 170, then get him killed, and it'd be back to 150s for 2 or 3 years, and then another 170 would show up. And that's how it was for several years. But then today, it's gotten to the point where I've got multiple 170 bucks on my property every year, and I'm only talking about 120 acres. It is isolated, lays out very well, pretty much an ideal layout, but it's only 120 acres, and these bucks are not going to live their entire lives on my 120 acres. But every year I will have multiple 170s, usually 2 to 3. And then every 2 to 3 years I'll have a giant. The last giant I had was Smokey. You recall him from 2017. He scored 206 inches. Well, I'm about due for another giant on my place, and I'll just keep my fingers crossed there. But I got a couple with some potential to be more than that 170 inch mark, and if they make it, I'll be sharing that with you soon. But I basically raised the score of the top end bucks on my property about 20 inches over the last decade or so. And how I did that is really very simple, but it takes a lot of discipline. And Terry, I don't know how many times we've talked about discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline is what separates the guys that kill big ones every year from those that want to. Discipline. So what I do on my property is I look at each age class, or it's almost like if you think of a high school class. You've got the class of 2015, you got the class of 2016, and it's the class of 2020 this year. So, each age group of bucks is a class. Well, I look at that class of bucks, and I cull out all but the best ones. And I don't necessarily do it myself. I let other hunters come here and hunt on my property. I take other hunters. But what I want to do is by the time that age class of bucks is 3 years old, I want to have knocked out all the worst ones. And I want to leave on my property the 2 or 3 that have the best antler potential, and allow those bucks to make it into the 5 and 6 year old age classes. Now, there's a lot of people, and I just made a post on my Facebook page in the last couple of days about this, and a couple of people said, you can't tell what they're going to be. They may start out as average 8-pointers, and then they end up being world-class bucks. Well, That's true. That can happen, but it's pretty rare. And what I've seen, and I really learned this with the captive deer that I had, the research herd I had here for a lot of years, is the best yearlings are almost always going to be the best 2-year-olds. The best 2-year-olds are almost always going to be the best 3-year-olds. The best 3-year-olds are almost always going to be the best 4-year-olds. And in the wild, it's the same way. Those bucks, now as yearlings, they can, you can have a buck that's born late. Maybe he was born to his mother was a doe fawn that came in heat in January, February. So, she didn't get bred during the November rut, and he was born late. And so his first rack doesn't really show. So in the wild, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the first rack. Although if I see a really good first year rack, if I see a first year rack that's got 10 points, that's a buck I really want to live. But at the same time, I don't pay a lot of attention if he's only got 6 points. I don't write him off yet. But by the time he's 2 years old, which bucks in that group are going to be the best at 2 years old, and especially by 3 years old. Now, I don't cull very many 2-year-olds. I try to give them some.
I think the only time I think that would have ever happened on your place is if you're taking a first time hunter or something like that, and you just don't have the heart to tell them no. But I've never heard of somebody killing a 2-year-old on you.
No, I mean,
if your grandkids came over and they wanted to kill one, you'd say, drop the hammer. But
yeah. So we're not trying to cull them at 2 years old. And when they get to be 3 years old, those bucks start ranging a little farther. At 3 years old, they figured out what's going on. They can probably wander off somewhere and be the top dog there. It may be a small woodlot or a tree line or whatever, but they can go there and probably be the top dog. So I want to, by the end of the year that they're 3 years old, I want to have most of them bucks killed off, except for the very, very best ones. And when I say very best ones, it's the ones that have at least a 5x5 main frame. If they've got little stickers or, something to lead me to think that they're going to have more points, extra points, those bucks
some type of character of some sort.
Right.
Yep.
So, and by doing that, so when it comes, you do that over years and years, and I've been doing it for several years here. Well, what happens is the best bucks in each age class live to that prime breeding age, 4, 5, 6 years old. And then the best bucks in each age class are doing the breeding.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that the younger bucks, research has shown that them younger bucks will breed some does too. However, the majority of the breeding is getting done by the top bucks in each age class. Well, so then those resulting fawns are going to have a little bit of a jump on ones that were, say, born 5 or 10 years before that on the same property. And I've just seen the quality of the bucks on my place improve so much in the last 20, 25 years. And that's what I'm doing is I'm getting out those clean 8-pointers that they're never going to be anything but 8-pointers. They may be, I know people that love 8-pointers and big 8-pointers. I happen to not be one of those people. That's not to say that I wouldn't love to shoot a 180-inch 8-pointer, but I'm not going to let a bunch of them live and have my place overrun with 140-inch 8-pointers trying to do it. I'm trying to grow the bucks, the highest scoring bucks possible in my place, and that generally means bucks with main frames of at least 5x5 and some extra points, and it's definitely paid off.
So I'm going to, in tonight's episode, I'm probably going to be the one that rants a little bit, and then I'm going to be the one that puts you on the spot a little bit. I'm good at putting you on the spot.
I need a devil's advocate, so fire away.
So my first rant is one of the things that and there's 2 topics we're going to talk about tonight. The next question is going to bring up the second one that absolutely drive me nuts on social media is the people who don't have the discipline to keep their finger off the trigger of their gun or their release and they poke a hole in a small buck and then claim it was for a cull. That absolutely just drives me nuts. I think too many hunters are using the cull philosophy to cover their lack of discipline in taking a tag sandwich and not following their plan. I think it really shows up a lot, especially during gun season, where people make a bad decision instead of just owning it up. And I've made bad decisions. I've shot a deer I shouldn't have shot, but people are using culling as an excuse for what they shot. So it drives me bonkers. But you probably don't even want to weigh in on that. But my question back to you is, I want you to go a little bit further in depth with what you see as tendencies between the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old. Meaning, if I have a absolute stud 3-year-old on my property that I want to make sure I do everything he can to live, I don't want a 140-inch 4 or 5-year-old that's going to whip that tail of that 3-year-old and push him somewhere else. I want that buck to stay on me, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you thinking when you start? You're saying you want to kill him there, but that's more you want to get that buck that you don't think has any potential. You don't want him to get mature to where he could run off some of your new up-and-comers. Is that part of the philosophy with all of this?
It is, and I simplified the explanation a little bit because you're not going to get every wild buck killed, at 3 years old.
Right.
Those bucks just wander too much, and some of them are going to get past you, and they're going to survive to 4, and you're going to have to kill them. I like to shoot them at 3 because the older they get, the harder they are. And I don't want to invest a bunch of time in a cull buck. I want to get them out, with the least amount of effort expended as possible.
And the other problem with this is there's a lot of states like Kentucky where you only get 1 buck the entire
right.
year. Ohio's the same. So is your discipline of your plan enough that you're going to go ahead and fill that tag for what you need to do long term on your property? That's a tough call. And then the smaller properties, depending on how they're set up, it's just hard to go in and kill multiple bucks in 1 year and not absolutely, pressure it too much. So there's a lot of moving factors. And the other thing that you touched on a little bit is there's always the people that say, well, this one time, or what about this time? There's always going to be flyers, and there's always going to, you're talking about the majority of the time based on what you've learned in captive research and on your farm. An example of that would have been the buck that we passed 2 years ago. Me and my buddy Patrick Simpson hunt a farm up in Illinois, and we had a 140-inch buck we called Curly, and passed him and he absolutely blew up. If you look at Patrick's social media, he was just an unbelievable non-typical, and I would have never guessed in 1 year between those two pictures that deer would have blown up. I think that's one of the examples that you're talking about. It can happen, but it's just not the norm. So,
right.
I know people who grew 7 inches when they turned 19, and they were the smallest kid in their class in school. But you have to look at it as you got to play the odds and
right.
what the majority of it is. And if you try to manage a property to the level that you're managing yours for that one flyer that's going to come around every so many years, you're never going to have a plan that works.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost like a good baseball manager. He's playing the odds. When he's changing pitchers and he's putting in a pinch hitter or whatever, he's playing the odds to increase his chances of winning the game. And what we're doing here is what we're doing. And it doesn't work every time for the baseball manager. It's the same way with the deer manager. It's not going to work every time. There's going to be some bucks that, they didn't show anything as a 3 or 4 year old. And then boom, like your Curly buck. All of a sudden he puts on 30 or 40 inches and a bunch of extra points in 1 year. It can happen, but that's not what you plan for. You plan for the high odds situation, and you let the bucks live that have the best odds of being really special down the road.
You know, the other side of the equation is what happens most of it, and we can reference the buck I shot on your place, the old guy, who was probably biggest as what, a 3 or maybe 4-year-old, and he was how big? 130.
Yep, at his biggest, and that buck lived at 10.
And I shot him as a 10.5-year-old, and I'm sitting here in the man cave right now looking at him, and he probably doesn't have 100 inches of antler on him, but it's just 2 baseball bats coming out of his head. You know, and that's what you're going to have. So, you know, I guess people are always going to come up with, hey, what about this? And you have to digest the information and play the odds for your best chances to accomplish your goal. And if you think that is to execute a plan, then go for it. But you can't live your life or manage your farm or do anything if you're worried about the one flyer. Play your odds and statistics to where it's going to be. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Exactly. And, you know, final thought on culling bucks, that I want to just repeat myself, because there's a lot of guys on the internet especially that are just throwing out ideas, and they never ever have the real life example to prove what they're saying. And, you know, I just made a post this morning. I showed 4 years of pictures of a buck that I shot last year. And somebody commented that, you know, the reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real life examples to prove what I'm saying. And the proof here, again, is that I've added 20 inches to the bucks on my farm, on average. The biggest buck here. When I started 25 years ago, 150 inches, what I could expect about every year. Every 3 or 4 years, I'd have a 170. Now I've got the 170s every year, and every once in a while I'll get one really special. Every 3 or 4 years, probably one really special, like Smokey 206 I shot in 2017. You know, I think that the proof is right there. I've been doing this approach, you know, to managing my farm for, you know, a couple decades or more now, and it's paying off. And I don't know how much better it can get. I mean, probably not much. I'm probably at about the limit. But I think most people would be happy if they owned 120 acres and they could shoot a 170-inch buck there every year.
Well, and there's a few people that, well, there's probably only 1 or 2 of us that pretty much can go hunting on your farm without you. But how strict you are with the people that you do take, it's not like you're saying to the people that you take, hey, you sit in that tree and don't shoot this buck, or I want you to shoot this buck. You're still in that blind with them, or in that tree stand telling them, don't pick your bow up. You know what I mean? So how you manage the people that you do let come on the farm, and you've culled bucks yourself. You've let other people come in and help you with that. I know I've shot 2 of them off of your place for you. But, you know, there's people, those of us who have been on your farm, and especially those who have hunted on it, can vouch for, you know, it's really tough when the biggest deer that you've ever had. I mean, I've been on your place and had my cell phone out knowing that I was not going to pick my bow up, watching the biggest buck I've ever had in my life walk underneath of me and not be able to shoot it. And, you know, I can vouch for what this process has given you. Do I think that everyone has the discipline to do what you've done? No. Do I think that some properties never have the chance? Just because you did it on your 120 doesn't mean every 120 acre piece of property could have the same results on it. I think you have to kind of take a lot into factor with the plan, but you know, and not just hide behind, oh, I shot a small buck, we're going to call it a cull.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up some really good points, Terry. The first, thought I had while you was talking there is I should probably share that there are stands on my farm where we don't shoot cull bucks.
That's right.
We don't even go there to shoot cull bucks.
Absolutely.
Those stands are saved for the big boys.
Right.
And they get very little pressure until the buck that I want to kill shows up. Then we can hunt those stands.
Right.
So we don't just shoot them everywhere. And the other great point you made is that this is not possible on every 120-acre farm. It's just not. A mine lays out fantastic. It wasn't planned that way 30 years ago. It just fell into my lap, and voila, I didn't even know what I had at the beginning. But whenever I visit with any of my consulting clients, my goal is the same with every one of them when I leave. Their goals vary. I'll go and I'll have them list their goals before I ever agree to take them on as a client. But my goal for them is always the same. And that is, I want them to have the opportunity every single year to shoot the biggest buck that's running their farm. Now, whether they do or not is their call. It might be a young buck. The biggest buck on their farm may be a 3-year-old 150-incher. And they're trying to improve their property and grow bigger bucks. Well, of course, they don't want to shoot that one. But if that's the biggest buck on the farm, I want them to have the opportunity to be able to shoot the biggest buck on their farm every single year. And whether they do or not is their call.
Right. So a little bit different philosophy, but again, it's kind of like the food plot business. People come on and they make these claims. You can either decide to suck into it and believe what even the guy stomping around saying he's looking for the king buck says. That's an inside joke for everybody between me and Don. That's why he's laughing. Or you can just flat out argue with him, or you can just be the respectful way and say, what research or what proof do you have behind your theory? Show me how this theory and whatever it is has accomplished the results that you're claiming. Because most of what's out there, nobody has the data behind it. So,
and that's very frustrating. That's probably the thing that frustrates me the most, Terry, is there's people putting out information that deer hunters are just eating it up. And we're going to get into that in another question here pretty quick. But they're putting out information that other deer hunters are just eating up, and it's absolutely bad information. And the guys putting it out have absolutely nothing to back it up. They just throw out an idea.
There's people out there that's saying stuff that's never even shot a Pope and young deer.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's crazy.
So, you and I, especially during hunting season, because we're together, with me being in Kentucky and you in Illinois, most of the time we're just texting or calling each other every day or so. But, especially during hunting season when we're around each other a lot, I want everybody to know that Don's always got ideas and theories spinning in his head. And there was a situation even 2-3 days ago that Don and I were texting each other back and forth about a theory that we had. But I can tell you, I've never, all these things are formulating in his head all the time. It's not like he claims he has it figured out. But what he comes out to his clients, to his master class, or what he says on this podcast, he will not say it unless he's got data to back it up. I mean, we're always talking about different ideas, but I've never heard you talk openly about ideas as being a foolproof way until you've done it.
Well, I talked to you about a lot of stuff that I haven't proven yet or whatever.
Right.
But
we're just talking about it. You've never said that you've never written an article in North American Whitetail without the data on it, or went to and tried to sell a book, or pitched a consulting job just to try to close and get some type of something out there, whether it's a consulting job or an article published off something you haven't proven yet. I've never seen that.
If you pay attention to most of my articles, a lot of them start with a story, of me on a hunt. The big buck comes by and I kill him, and then I go in to the real, subject of the article. I want to prove it with a big buck on the ground before I promote it.
Right.
So,
all
are
right.
we ready to move on to the next one?
Sure.
We're through the first one.
This is why we left all this time for this. This is the fun stuff.
Yep.
I'm probably going to get on a rant on this one too.
Well, and this will probably lead to some more questions submitted about call bucks, and that'd be great. We'll just follow up and just because we cover a topic one time doesn't mean we're never going to come back to it. So if you got questions, if we've got you thinking about something and you got questions about culling bucks, fire away. We'll hit this subject again. But we're going to move on to the next question. It comes from Brian Ellermans of Mattoon, Illinois, right down the road from me. It's on aging a buck. Brian says, in Illinois, I've seen bucks with skinny, small 6-point basket racks that had a body and neck like a cow. At the time, I assumed it was just a 1.5-year-old with a large body. But later, I could have sworn I'd find a trail cam pic of the same buck 2 years prior, meaning that small dink was actually older than I thought. On the flip side, I've seen skinny bucks with 160-inch 10-point racks. These are 2.5-year-olds that have great potential, or could it be a small-bodied 6-year-old? I've heard that you can tell a buck's age by his belly, shoulders, back sagging, etc. But the only way I am convinced is if I learn about this particular buck myself. Maybe I have trail camera pictures or have seen him before, so I know he has to be at least a few years old. I think it'd be great to have every deer I killed aged by its teeth, then start drawing conclusions over time. I'm starting to think antler mass is more of an indicator than body size. What are your thoughts on all this with your experience raising captive deer and killing trophy bucks for years? I mean, look at people. There are 13-year-old boys that are 6 foot tall and 13-year-old boys that are 4 foot tall. I've always thought of people vary so much, and so do deer. In that case, how on earth can these guys on TV and social media see a buck for the very first time and instantly say, oh, that's a 5-year-old? It makes no sense to me. Well, Brian, I agree with you 100%. In fact, I made a social media post this morning. I showed pictures of the same buck over 4 different seasons. It's actually a buck that I shot last year. Now, if anybody's interested, go to my Facebook page, Higgins Outdoors, and you can see that post. I do not, and actually, I've just made a new YouTube video that's not even out yet on aging bucks. I personally do not think that you can age a buck by a picture.
You mean all of the Facebook questions? How old is this deer on Facebook?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, though, where did this come from?
Jeez,
there's a major deer organization out there that has an age this buck segment in their magazine. It's total garbage. Listen, people, I've watched probably I don't know 200 captive deer grow up, and they're just different. They're all different. And Brian makes a great point. They're like people. I said before, we all know the kid we went to school with that was hairy as an ape in the 8th grade. And then we know the guy that we went to school with that was the runt, but we come back to our 10-year reunion, he's the biggest guy there.
Yeah, there's people.
They just mature at different rates. They've got different bodies, like people have different bodies. Some of them are taller and thinner. Some of them are shorter. The buck Kyle Harmon killed last year, a lot of people are probably familiar with that buck Uno.
Right.
I went and seen Uno after Kyle shot it. That buck's body was the smallest bodied big mature buck that I think I've ever seen. I don't know what he ended up
his rack was huge, which kind of skews everything. But he just recently got that full body mount back, and he's got it on his social media page. And you look at it, and it's like, whoa, that's really out of proportion. But hey, there's people my size, and there's people that fit into a tree saddle like West Delks. I mean, it's just two different sides of the spectrum.
Yep. But that Uno buck was a perfect example. What struck me when I walked into Kyle's garage and seen that buck, I mean, yeah, his rack was huge and he had them giant brow tines, which would catch your eye. But the thing that really struck me was how small that deer's body was, because I forget how old that buck was. What was he? 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, something like that.
Yeah, I think he was 8. I don't know. He was an old buck.
A mature buck, but I'm telling you, his body looked like a 2-year-old's. And there's no way that anybody, I don't care who they are, can look at a picture. Now, sure, you can look at a picture and you can say that's a yearling. And most of the time you can say that's probably a 2-year-old. But once they get to 3.5 and older, I don't believe, and I'm firmly convinced, I will argue with anyone, that you can't tell how old they are once they get 3.5. And you're going to be wrong more than you're right if you try.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is you can tell whether, and if we're classifying, a mature deer in most people's minds is 3.5 and older. We're saying mature deer 4 or 5 and older, but basically you're saying, once they get to 3.5, it's a crapshoot. I mean, and everybody's saying, oh, their brisket or the sag of their back behind their front shoulders or the muscle definition. Well, if a deer grows up on my farm and he's eating Real World Complete Feed with 18% protein out of a feeder the entire year, do you think he's going to have more muscle definition than a deer in eastern Kentucky in the mountains that's eating twigs and branches?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, nutrition is absolutely huge on the growth of deer, but that's a topic for several other podcasts. We won't get into that one today, but you're absolutely right. The region of the country they come from. So you see some guy on social media throws a picture of a buck he just got on social media, and he gets 100 responses on how old that buck is from people all over the country. So you got a guy in Florida and Georgia, they're throwing out, what they think. And you got guys in Minnesota throwing out another idea, and Kansas and wherever. And yeah, it's a crapshoot.
There's only 2 ways you know how old a buck is, and that is if you have trail camera history of him since he was a yearling or a 2-year-old,
mm-hmm.
or he's dead in the back of your truck and you cut that front incisor out and send it to deerage.com and have them dissect it and count the rings.
Yep.
That's my opinion. There's only 2 ways. And I don't even believe, and people will argue with me and send me hate mail about it. I do not even believe in sending a jawbone in and looking at teeth wear. As you can get an idea, but it's not going to define it. The only true scientific way to do it is the way that deerage.com does it. Great people to work with. I send every deer that I kill up there. Costs like $30. That's it. It might even not even cost that. It might be like 28 or something. And great people to deal with. I've used them for quite a few years. Or you have the trail camera history of it. Now, we'll talk a little bit and go back to the story of the old guy. Now, that buck, when we talked about me coming up and trying to hunt that was the same year you killed Smokey. So you had shot your target buck off the property, so you weren't going to take another buck off that property that year. You were going to dial in and go kill Trump. We just didn't know you were going to do it the next hunt. Yeah. But I was like, yeah, I'll go. And at that time, we thought he was a 9-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back and look at the trail camera pictures of that deer, I forget what year his face turned like really, really white. I mean, he just, it was almost like an old person with their hair going white. His whole face turned white. Maybe it was when he was what we thought was to be an 8-year-old. You could actually see, him. But up until then, people would have looked at him and thought that he was a, 3-4-year-old. It's hard to guess what people would have said. The other thing I think ends up happening is these people get on and they kill this buck and just automatically say, well, he's got to be a 7-year-old. Okay, well, I'll pay the $30. I've actually told people that I will pay the $30, and not to argue with them, but just so they have facts instead of just taking a guess, because they don't have history of the deer. They don't have trail camera pictures, but it really bugs me when people claim that a deer is older or even any age without the facts behind it. And, this guessing game of how old is this buck? At the end of the day, if the deer's big enough for you to accomplish your goal in hunting, take it. There's some people that I want to kill a 8-pointer. I want to kill a 120-inch deer or 140. If that deer meets what your goals are for that farm, drop the hammer.
Shoot it.
You're right. Quit worrying about it. But if you get into where you're wanting to kill, a mature buck that's 4, 5, 6 years old, that's a different story altogether. The other example is the other buck that I shot off of you that you wanted shot, and I think you weren't even hunting. I think you were a couple counties over the night that I shot him, and I was at your place, and you told me that if I saw this buck, you wanted it shot, and you thought he was a 3-year-old.
I did.
And so he comes out, and I drop the hammer on him and poke a hole through him. He runs off, and I went ahead and sent his, and he came back as a 6-year-old. He just completely shocked you. So, I mean,
I don't know where he came from. He was a new buck, and I thought, hey, let's just be one of them 2-year-olds from last year. He changed a little bit, and
right.
I was shocked that he was 6.
So even on your farm with this, it just proves that you can't tell.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll end my rant.
Yeah. Well, if you check out my social media post I made this morning with the 4 years of pictures of that buck, my whole point there was that if you ever hear me in a seminar or an article or anything give a buck's age, it's because I've got the history. It's not because I'm looking at a picture guessing. Because I get so many pictures sent to me, guys want to know, how old do you think this buck is? Well, I don't have any idea because I don't have any history with it. If I'm given an age, it's because I've got the history, and that's what I was proving with that post.
The other thing that I think people have a hard time believing, and they come from, other states that aren't the Illinois, Iowas, Kansases of the world, is there can be really good yearling bucks up there in the Midwest. So, I mean, I've seen some pictures of yearling bucks that you've showed me up there that you've kept and said, hey, this one could be really special. And I'm like, there's no way that's a yearling buck. I mean, we're lucky if we have forkhorns in Kentucky that are that big. So you also have to remember that it's a lot to do with where it's at, and people doubt because they say, oh, that year and a half year old buck could never be that big. But I think you just got to understand where it's at too.
Well, and the thing about year-and-a-half-old bucks is I've had several over the years that caught my eye, and it's very rare that I get to watch those bucks mature. The death rate on yearling bucks is just so high, they just get into trouble.
Yeah. And
then a lot of times they're not done dispersing. In the early fall, you get their picture, but they're still moving around. So by the time they really settle down into a new home range, it might be 3 or 4 miles from where your property's at or where you're getting the picture. So I do occasionally run across a great yearling and keep his pictures and such. And then very, very rarely do I get to watch him mature, but it's happened a couple times.
Right. All right. And Brian's a good guy. If I know Brian very well, him and his buddy Kevin Thayer, who we've brought up on the podcast, they're really good guys. Brian actually has a YouTube channel called E-Factor Outdoors, so go check that out. Those guys drove all the way to Illinois for a fundraiser for me a few years ago where we were raising money to build houses in Haiti that my wife and my daughter were going on. And those two jokers jumped in a truck and drove all the way down here from up there to support it. So great guys, and we appreciate the question, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So we'll move on to our last question before this podcast ends up being 2 hours long. Our last question comes from Sam Carosa from Mokina, Illinois. Sam says, I have owned and managed 170 acres in Mercer County, Illinois for 7 years now. Despite improving habitat over the years, our sightings and pictures of bucks 4.5 years old and older has steadily decreased, and the number of does has gone up. I fear we have created the dreaded, quotation marks, doe factory. Do you believe in this term? What can be done to reverse it? The only thing I can pinpoint is an increased amount of intrusion with habitat management, despite our best efforts to be careful. Thanks, Don and Terry. Well, Sam, I actually, if you haven't visited my new YouTube channel yet, go visit Higgins Outdoors YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe while you're there. But one of the first videos I released was on doe factories. I do not believe that term at all. I don't. Some of the the ideas that go along with that term. I just have never seen it on the properties that I've hunted and managed. I think you're right on the money. I think it's the pressure. And in fact, I just recorded a new video this week for the YouTube channel. It's not out yet. And we talked about this. Human intrusion is the number one thing that ruins hunting properties. More hunting properties have been ruined following bad advice than you can even imagine, than anything else. That's probably the number one thing that ruins hunting properties. You get on the internet and everybody's got an idea. This guy says, well, you need to put water holes. Water holes are just great for deer. You know, look at this. I bury this little kitty tub in the ground, and I go out there with my skid loader and a tank, and I fill that water tub or water pond about once a month, and put my camera over there, and look, we got deer drinking out of it and this and that. And next guy says, I'll tell you what the trick is, or the secret is. You need to build these horizontal rubs. You take you a cedar post and you tie it between two wooden fence posts or two trees, and boy, the bucks just love to rub on that thing. Put your camera on there and you get a picture of the bucks. And you know, another guy's got an idea. You know, you need to take and cut you down a tree and then go plant that tree in your food plot right in front of your blind or your stand, and the bucks come out there and they all got to hit it. Well, every one of these things causes human intrusion onto your property. That's the killer. I mean, a mature buck's number one desire is a place free of human intrusion. He don't want to see you, he don't want to hear you, and he don't want to smell you. And if you're running around the property doing these habitat projects, the does will tolerate it. The does will just learn to skirt around where you're at and everything else. But a mature buck is not going to tolerate that. And, you know, a lot of the properties that are so-called doe factories, if you will, are just poorly managed property. There's a poor plan been put in place. And, you know, one of the ideas is that you don't want to have food in the summertime because your property becomes a doe factory. You want to plant fall plots, and soybeans are the worst because then you get all the deer and all the does in your place in the summer. Blah, blah, blah. That's a bunch of bull crap. I'm telling you right now, I've got summer plots. 2/3 of my plots are planted in the spring, 1/3 in the fall. My property has does on it all summer long. The bucks move off in their bachelor groups. But you know what happens in the fall when those bachelor groups start to break up? Then bucks come back. And they come back with a vengeance. And they come back in herds. And I will have more bucks on my property the last day of season than I will at any other time. They just keep coming. A mature buck doesn't care if he's got a bed next to a doe or in a bunch of does. That's another misconception that goes with the doe factory, that the buck needs his own bedding area. And I can't tell you how many times I've been to a consulting client's place and he's listened to so much garbage on the internet that, you know, my number one or the hardest thing I've got to deal with is I got to get this guy to forget everything that he heard on the internet or seen on the internet, because it just isn't true. A good example is a guy that had a property here in Illinois that I went and met with this past spring, and I just couldn't seem to get through this guy's head that, you know, a buck does not need his own bedding area. He wants to go where there's the least amount of human intrusion, and if there's 50 does in there, he doesn't care. Have you ever seen a state park that's just full of deer and it's got giant bucks in there? Well, I guarantee you them bucks are laying with does and everything else. And sometimes I think we overcomplicate it, but at the same time, I think there's people out there that try to overcomplicate it. They want you to look at them as some kind of expert. So they come up with these terms like doe bedding areas, or not doe bedding areas, but doe factories. And it's just, I don't buy it whatsoever. And the other thing is that the people that put out these ideas, you ever notice that they never have a deer that they're shooting in their videos? If they do, it's with a rifle from 200 yards away. If these guys know what they're talking about, you know, how come, and they've got videos on the internet every week, how come you never see them shoot a deer? How come they're just standing there talking? You know, you need to look at really where your information is coming from. And the doe factory, go to my YouTube channel, listen or watch the video, and you'll see, in my opinion, I don't believe that there's such thing as a doe factory. It's just that the property has not really been managed right.
Yeah, and all of you video editing nerds will get a kick out of some of the animations that our buddy Steve Shields, who produces the videos for Don, did in that video. They're pretty cool. But Sam, there's a couple things here that your question, even though it's 6 sentences long, we're making a lot of assumptions in Don's answer. But the other thing is, we don't think that the doe factory. Both of us have believed that. I even go a step further where I want as many does on my property as possible here in Kentucky, because I want every buck locked down with a doe, because I don't hunt the rut here in Kentucky that much. I'm always in Illinois. I hunt early and late, but that's a whole other topic. But at 170 acres, it's not only your intrusion, it's the intrusion of the properties around you. So I would also try to figure out what's going on those properties, because you might have some killmongers doing deer drives on your property line, shooting everything they can. So there's so many other variables that we don't know just by a question that comes in. But I tend to agree with Don on this one. I would say that your biggest problem is either how those deer are hunted around you, or intrusion, that they're not staying.
Yeah, when I go visit a property for a consulting client, one of the first things I tell them is, if you want to consistently kill big mature bucks, you got to hunt them on the same properties where they spend their daylight hours. So that means the first thing we got to do is we got to figure out how we're going to get the big bucks that are in your area, how we're going to get them to bed on your property.
Bingo.
Because if you're hunting one property over from where that buck's bedding, just one property over, I believe your odds of killing that buck are 10% what they are if you're hunting him on the property where he beds.
Yep.
So that's one of the first things I do when I go to a property is I got to figure out how we're going to get the best bucks in this neighborhood to bed on this property instead of the neighbors.
So Sam, great question. But that's our opinion based on the information you gave us. But if there's more information than that, reach out to Don via email, private message through his website, and he can talk about it a little bit further with you. But based on what you gave us in this question, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I really think this YouTube channel is it's just starting to pick up some steam. It's brand new. We just started it in early June, so it's not even 2 months old yet. But starting to get a lot of comments from people that have seen it and have follow-up questions or whatever. And we just filmed, I think, 4 more videos this week that Steve's producing. And so
not only are they very informative, Don tries to keep them fairly short. They're not crazy long. They let you watch them, but get straight to the point. And the production quality of what we're doing with these is really solid. Steve is the best in the business when it comes to video production. So yeah, check it out at Don's YouTube channel, Higgins Outdoors. So they going to post one this week? Or is Steve editing? Do you have a schedule on that?
Yeah, there should be one out this week. We're trying to put one out per week.
Okay.
So we got a question this week. Somebody sent in, they can't wait every 2 weeks to listen to our podcast. They wanted us to put out a short one every other between the long ones.
Yeah,
so we're doing a podcast every week.
When it gets closer to hunting season, we do that. I know during October when we first started this, we were doing it every week, and also it's a little bit easier when I'm up in Illinois so much that we can do it while we're together instead of over the phone. But in the off season like this, we've been trying to keep it at the every 2 week mark.
Yeah, so that YouTube channel should help you get your whitetail fix as you wait for the next Chasing Giants podcast to come out.
Yep. All right. Well, we've good thing we cut that first part short. We're at almost a minute 15. So I don't have anything else. Do we need to close out with anything before you thank our sponsors?
No, I think that's about it. I just hope to see a lot of the listeners at some of these seminars that are coming up in the next 2 weeks. And hope you guys are getting some pictures of some giants, velvet giants on your trail cameras. I appreciate everyone's support.
All right. Well, take us out.
All right. We want to thank our sponsors, Matthews Solo Cam, 360 Hunting Blinds, Vortex Optics, Lone Wolf Stands, Real World Wildlife Products, Quiet Cat Bikes, and our title sponsor, Buy a Farm. Take care, everyone.